Welcome to the Dance Centre podcast. I am your host, Claire French, and I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, also known as Vancouver, Canada. I'll be talking to dancers, choreographers and other members of the dance world here on the West Coast to find out more about their creative work and practices and to discuss what it means to us to be dance professionals today. Thanks for joining us. Vanessa Goodman respectfully acknowledges that she lives, works and creates on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam nations. She holds a BFA from Simon Fraser University and is the Artistic Director of Action at a Distance Dance Society. Vanessa is attracted to art that has a weight and meaning beyond the purely aesthetic and uses her choreography as an opportunity to explore the human condition. Her choreographic practice is driven by weaving generative movement and sonic systems into performative environments. Her work creates a sense of intimacy between our surroundings and the body. She has received several awards and honours, including the Iris Garland Emerging Choreographer Award, the Yolanda M. Farris Scholarship, the Crystal Dance Prize twice, the Schultz Endowment from Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, and the Space to Fail programme. Vanessa's work has been presented across this continent and in Europe. For more information, please go to actionatadistance.ca. I'm here with Vanessa Goodman. Delighted to be speaking with Vanessa again, and moved on considerably, actually. We did speak during COVID, I believe, was the last in the official capacity like this, with a kind of conversation interview. So here we are again. A lot has happened in the world, in Vanessa's world. and we will also be going back over some old ground and catching up to where Vanessa and her work is currently and where Action at a Distance is and all of those things. So welcome, Vanessa.
Thanks for having me, Claire, and thank you to the Dance Centre for facilitating this.
Great. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to, I'm sure, what will be a vibrant conversation about art making, but also about world travel, about creating, and about kind of almost next steps. So Vanessa and I, just for transparency, have been working together a little bit in a slightly different context. I'm only saying that if we appear familiar and quite familiar in some places, we've become buddies around talking about dance and with other people too. And so if you find that we're a little bit in that zone, please just enjoy it with us. We're celebrating that ourselves. But to start us off, Vanessa, can you please give us a little bit of backstory maybe on your dance journey, as far back as you would like to go and as current as you feel you can make it today?
Sure, that would be my pleasure. So I grew up in a family that really loved the arts. I was really lucky. My grandmother was really into dance from her young age for herself. So she introduced it actually to my mother. And so on my mother's side, there was like a love of dance. And then on my father's side, there was a love for visual art and music. So I feel like really lucky that I was exposed to a lot of art very young. And actually, my mom almost went to university for dance and then decided to become a bookbinder instead. She almost went to York. So like there's this long history. Like I remember my grandmother took me to the ballet when I was very young, like at 6, and I saw Karen Kane perform Swan Lake, and I remember falling asleep and after the second intermission or something like that. I also remember going to see De Rosier and being terrified, but also loving it. And my grandmother went up to him afterwards and introduced me. So I remember like these very kind of like formative things. I think I was also around 6 years old at that time, and it was an outdoor performance at an outdoor theater. And I just remember these people were wearing like sculptural costumes that were like had foam in them, so that they were, when they were balled up, they looked like they were rocks, and then they would unfurl, and they were people. And I remember being really kind of blown away with the transformation of that, and also slightly terrified, which, is an interesting place. So my own dance journey didn't really start until I was 9 in terms of my own body. And it wasn't the ballet or contemporary dance that had me really captivated, but it was actually dancers such as the Nicholas Brothers, Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly. And it was like this mask embodiment of tap and sound that had me totally enthralled. And I said, I want to do that. I didn't want to sing. I didn't want to be in a musical. but I wanted to make sound and I wanted to dance like them.
Mm.
And there was something about the rhythm, the heaviness, the lightness, their dynamics, the way they were kind of like, yeah, just creating sound and then also creating these fantastical kind of combinations of what was possible with their bodies. So I started taking tap. And I started the Koffler School of Dance, and I had an incredible teacher, Allison Shand, who sadly passed away very young, but she was huge for me as a dance artist. And Allison Shand was an amazing woman. She even though I completely was probably the worst dancer in the class, she fostered me and, encouraged me to keep going. And I think I had this realization with my first encounters with dance. It was also the first time that I realized I was in a classroom environment or a learning environment where I felt like I wasn't missing information. I'm dyslexic. And so for me, it was the first time being in a classroom that I didn't feel like I was lesser than in terms of understanding what was going on in the room. So it was a really empowering practice for me to take on. And it was really important, I think, for my confidence at that time. So it progressed from there. I started taking ballet eventually, and Colleen Friedman taught contemporary. So then comes kind of like grade 9, where I had to choose a high school. And I went to alternative schools. So those are schools in Toronto that are run by parents and the teachers. There's no principal. And so it's a bit of an alternative learning structure. And so I didn't really want to go into a public school, and I wanted to keep dancing. And my sister Megan at the time was at Etobicoke School of the Arts. And so I auditioned and I got in, and I had Shari Wolf for ballet, Gabby Camino, and she was my teacher for 5 amazing years. A huge part of why I am a dance artist is because of Gabby. And then Colleen Friedman eventually came on to ESA2. And then also, of course, I have to mention Laurie Raymond, who started PBG Dance Projects in Toronto, and she had a junior company, which was myself, Liz Konishida. She's a dance artist based in Europe, but she's come to Vancouver and shown her work here. It was Ben Camino, Ben's brother Alex, myself, and a bunch of other dance artists. So Laurie really was also a huge part of my dance training. So along dancing in school and with the school's company, I was also working with Laurie and working in modern contemporary dance at that time. That's what we would perform in. And the junior company would sometimes perform with the senior company. We would make work on each other. It was really a fabulous place.
So making work started really young. Making work was in your makeup at a young age, which is great.
Totally. Yeah. And actually, I think Sarah Baker teases me because she still remembers, I would come to ballet class, I think I was probably 10 years old, and I'd say can I stay after and show you this dance that I made? And I would stay after and show her. And I actually kind of have these strange memories of the embodiment of those dances too.
Oh, great.
But yeah, so I think making was something that I was really interested in, definitely in my early years and into high school. When I got to university, I took a step back from that. I went to Simon Fraser University. And when I was there, I really decided that I wanted to be a dance artist. And I think actually that kind of changed in my last year. In high school, I also was at Canadian Children's Dance Theatre, and I spent some time there. And I really wanted to dance in a repertoire company. And so that was kind of my focus when I was at SFU, was get as much technical training as I possibly could. So I would audit the classes. In my first year, I audited the 4th year class with Megan Walker Straight, who taught Cunningham. And that was really great. They were really flexible. I said, I want to do more. They found ways for me to do more, because I was used to doing a lot of training. I was used to dancing a lot of my days.
Yeah.
And then, I had the fortune of apprenticing with Judith Gary's company as a directed study while I was at SFU. And that led into a job with her company when I graduated, which was a 10-year period of time. I danced for Dancers Dancing and Judith Gary. And Judith is amazing. She's been one of my mentors. She's an incredible human and an incredible facilitator in a room. She knows how to really lead the room with care. So I was really fortunate to have such a great role model in that respect. And then I met Justine Chambers after graduating. And I had known Justine from her work in Toronto and being a huge admirer of as a dance artist. And I got to work with her, Jane Osborne and myself with Leah Wald. We had a collective called the Contingency Plan. And we commissioned Serge Benethan and Justine right out of university to make works for us because we knew we really wanted to learn from established and senior artists. And we started making work together as well, and training with Justine also really changed me. It really changed the way I use my eyes in performance particularly. And it was a really formidable time for me, particularly how to approach performance was studying with Justine during that period of time. And then Leah, Jane, and I continued to make work together as a collective. And eventually I started making work on my own. I had a couple of commissions with Simon Fraser University for the repertoire class. And I really realized that I loved making work again. So this was like kind of an interesting, I paused for I'd say 5 years, really focusing, making work. And then all of a sudden I was like, no, I really need to be doing it. And I was very sure I needed not to be dancing in it, actually, the work that I was making. I was really sure I needed to be on the outside of it. Yeah. And so I did that for a number of years. And then somebody came to me and said, you need to dance in your own work. And it was a presenter. And I said, okay. So they challenged me. And I did. And I made Container, which is the first solo that I made on myself, which toured quite a bit. And it's quite personal. It deals with my own personal kind of heritage and identity and kind of the struggles around that and the politics around that I feel, and also the politics around being on this land, which is occupied. So that was a really important work for me. And then from there, it kind of just kept on growing in terms of whether I was making work on myself, making work collaboratively, or making work collaboratively with a group, and placing myself on the outside to facilitate.
It's amazing.
And yeah, I think that's it. That's the history.
Well, it brings us to talk about current projects, doesn't it? And it brings us to, it kind of is a really nice kind of historical or background context, if you like, for where you are at and the diversity and versatility of your practice right now on all of those projects, which we'll get to. But I would just love to go back a little bit, just in terms of, as you know, I'm obsessed with tap now in my life. And when I was at stage school when I was younger, and I see a kind of correlation with you in terms of where the inspiration might have come from. I just want to acknowledge this kind of space between kind of installation and performance, or the idea of activating scenes or activating theatrical spaces, that even if you didn't have an interest in musicals, with the Nicholas brothers and those people, they were jumping off furniture. You know, they were working with different levels all the time. Like that energy was it was not contained, or it was somewhat kind of, they were subverting that idea of containment, or tame and wild. And I see that in your work too, actually, quite a bit with what you're exploring. But the installation and the performance, those two things coming together. And then, of course, there's the sound component. And I've noticed, having known you for, a couple of decades now, I believe, and that I've seen a progression, and it feels like it's a cyclical progression, almost back to sound, back to not necessarily rhythm, but more like either maybe biorhythms or like natural rhythms, or like just sounds around us, like how much that is part of embodiment and how much that is part of performance world and part of our experience, a part of how we sense. And so I wonder if there's an element of maybe talking about how sound came into your practice. But I'm also as interested in where you left off with Container. There was something that happened, I think, for you in terms of a body confidence as well, which I would also like to address a little bit, however you interpret that, and my interpretation of your, kind of evolution. But there is something in that. I could go off in so many tangents, but I just wonder if we could maybe kind of go with that for now. Those two things, sounds body confidence, and then environmental kind of inspiration. Okay, so
sound. Start with body confidence?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, with Container, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I often joke when I'm facilitating, I've made a career out of being awkward. I say this to especially emergent artists when I'm facilitating and teaching. I've made this whole career of embodiment that is not necessarily formed in convention. Of I could do unison, but it was really hard for me actually to do like ensemble work, even though like I did 10 years of a lot of ensemble work. Like I've always been interested in state driven work and task-based work. And I call actually what I do generative performance systems. Like I call what I do, it uses improvisational tools, but I use systems to structure those tools or those states and then continue on in the development of a work. And I think doing container actually really helped me understand how I make. Like coming back to embodying the work myself put me in a position where I understood better how to articulate what I'm interested in making to other people.
Yeah.
So that I think gave me a confidence in my practice that before I would say like the stability in it wasn't as clear. And then also I think I've always been in a lot of processes that have been collaborative in terms of interpreters like contributing their knowledge and their archive to the creation of a movement language to a work. But doing container, I think for the first time might have kind of blown something open in me in the sense where I was like really clear, like this is who I am and as an artist and my embodiment. So I'd say that as well, like that really shifted things for me in that way.
I think what also happened, and you've said this, but I'm just going to say it in different words, that I feel like you had the opportunity through that work to distill your interest in form and content in terms of why you were choosing the content you were choosing from a place of understanding and respecting formal compositional either devices or formal composition just in and of itself, which we get a lot from modern dance, right, in terms of patterning and things. And I feel like there was a real distilling of that information, but not a loss of either. And I feel like that's a really important step because I feel like in one way, when the presenter asks you to do something, there's also a way of you then being able to take that request, which you could have ignored, and decide what your questions will be. I'm also mentioning that because it's my segue into saying you're a perfect example of somebody who is super intelligent, extremely creative, generous, and curious. And I think that's a really important message because even though you mentioned dyslexia, you are so bright, smart, and with it and present at all times. And I think there's a beautiful way that you're able to do that in your compositional work and with bringing your curiosity to the physical. So I think this is a really beautiful moment. I think in Container people can see that, but you also dealt with a confidence literally in exposing your physical body. And so on that level, there was a shedding of the form being a veil, hiding you. I'm talking so much about this because I'm going through this process myself. And in my 50s, I'm also kind of engaging with it in that way. And I just think it's a beautiful thing to share. And I think it's an important step. These are important phases or chapters of an artist's life. So I just wanted to kind of throw that one in so you don't have to. And also we can go on from there.
Well, I also want to ask you, like, can I flip the table for a moment and just say you're going through this process right now of creating a solo work for yourself and looking at non-narrative character work inside it. And in a sense, like Container is kind of that. It's non-narrative character because there's the Vanessa that's on stage is still Vanessa, but at the same time, I'm a version of myself that is much different than I present in my day-to-day life. Yeah. So I'm curious about how you're finding that in your process right now.
Well, thank you, but I'm also trying to bring in the role, and you've talked about this a little bit with Judith Gary's position. You witnessed this when you were working with her as a facilitator and a host of an event, or as the host of a rehearsal or a workshop. I'm bringing in that role, which I've been in for a long time, into the performance environment for myself, and it's a way of distilling my experience, if you like, as a dance artist or even in adjacent roles to being a dancer, or a choreographer. But it's also a way of feeling like I want to address in a as authentic way as possible my love of performance and my interest in performance still. And so if by putting it onto other people, I also can live with, or I can work from this veil of form, potentially. You know, I can use that. That can mask a part of me as an artist, but I can't mask that if I actually create it on myself. I don't know how interested I am in everybody seeing me do it, but I just think it's a very, very important part of my process right now.
Very cool. Yeah, it's interesting you talk about form too, just because like I've had the privilege of several artists approaching me to learn container over the years. And every time somebody comes to me and asks to learn container, I'm always a little bit confounded. Like, why? Because when I revisit it physically and I've had to perform it, I find the flaws in it compositionally, which is like in its duration, actually. Like, I feel like it moves through the gates too quickly. And so every time somebody asks to learn it, which now I think has been 3 or 4 times, so not like excessive, but like enough that I've been able to revisit with people, I approach it with them like, yeah, sure, let's learn it. If you want, I can teach you the systems and I can teach you the context of the work and how I arrived here, but also let's explore what the work is for you now in your embodiment, because it is so personal about who I am and who my identity is and what my politics are. I feel like it's like almost it's unfair for somebody to perform the work as an exact replica of how I approach it. And it's interesting bringing up form, because recently when I had the privilege of sharing the work with Danny Mackenzie Long, I reference a lot of things in that work. I reference Mary Wigman, I reference Nijinsky, I reference like my own identity, I reference things from culture from my own identity. But it's interesting to go through. Danny and I watched videos of Nijinsky, like of the palms, particularly. Like I work a lot with like these kind of like flat spatula palms in the work, and I also subvert it with doing very particular things with my fingers inside of it. And then also in terms of Mary Wigman, like kind of this idea of transformation of embodiment inside of it. So we watched several things from Wigman, but it's just especially because of that time, like because I'm referencing a specific time and kind of like this idea of the never nude. So it's just interesting to think about form, because like when you talk about form, there is like so much form that's embedded and layered inside of that is specific to archival dance, and then also to like archive of ancestral knowledge. Anyway, so just to say that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really not only informs that work, but informs an audience about your interest in it, in your work. You know, so there's that kind of lovely way of like almost packaging it, you know, inside this the theatrics, if you like, or inside this personal work, which is really, really strong. I mean, that's something we could talk about. We could segue into that now already, including the sound element, or like how you've incorporated sound much more into your generative performance systems, but also around your intellectual, or around your ideas, like how your concepts and the concepts that you bring to the movement space, or to just those kinds of elements. I'm thinking there's, on the one level, there's the concepts and the politics and the personal identity, and then I think there's a broader sense of concept, and I'm wondering if you bring a concept, or if concepts emerge from these systems that you're creating, and how those things work. And then of course the sound element brings a whole other generative process. So there's loads for us to talk about there, but for the listeners, I think these are all, it feels very much like what we're doing is giving context to the listeners around you and the way you work, but also it does feed an aesthetic. It does feed into, you know, regardless of how score-based or how improvisatory the work is, when people come and engage with it as an audience, I think it's really beautiful for them to hear about all of this that goes before, that prepares both an audience and the performers to be in this space. So, yeah.
Maybe I'll start with sound, because I can like jump from where we are exactly into a very logical place. So like I think it's hilarious that singing is part of my practice now, because I literally chose not to go to Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson, because you had to sing.
Right. And you didn't want to be in
in your
musicals.
undergrad.
You didn't want to do musicals.
And I didn't want to sing. So like, it's hilarious to me that I've ended up here and that it's become such a huge part of my practice. So just to say that, but I'm going to just go back to container for a second, because that's the first time I worked with Lossel, Scott Morgan. Scott made me a piece of music for Container. And that started me, like, I've always had a very specific relationship to sound. Sound has always been kind of like, and it could be no sound or sound score. Mm-hmm. It could be like, atmospheric and really like sub score or environmental sounds, or like really rhythmic. Like, I love sound, and it's always been kind of like movement map for myself. And Brady Marks has a beautiful way of describing sound as touch. And I work with Brady quite closely too. She talks about how, when sound waves move through the air, they actually touch those beautiful little hairs in your ears. So actually, when you're making sound, you're touching somebody else's body. Like, it is visceral. So, whether it's like the vibrations that you feel from a sub when you're sitting in this audience, or when you're at a concert and your sternum starts to vibrate, like, sound touches us and it moves us in a very specific way. And whereas dance, can sometimes be a very visual form, in the sense that we're perceiving it or listening to it. But like, when you listen to dance, you actually feel it, like your body is being touched by it. So this idea of amplifying the body really resonates with me, because the body that is then, offering a performance proposition, is actually in contact with the witness in a meaningful way. So I love sound for so many reasons. So I worked with Scott, and that was huge for me, our dialogues around shape of sound and how it works with dance. And I continue to work with Scott. David Pay introduced me to Caroline Shaw. That opened up a whole new part of my practice. I think in 2014, I bought a theremin because I was determined to make a piece with live sound. I quickly learned that you really need 10,000 hours. Or I needed 10,000 hours if I was ever going to play theremin on stage. So then I bought my first loop pedal, and I bought a microphone from Value Village in Port Coquitlam, and I started looping my voice, looping the theremin, playing with those systems. David Pay introduced me to Caroline Shaw shortly after that, I'd say like sometime in 2015, and it was Caroline's use of her voice that kind of really started to expand what I thought was possible in my own body. Again, this was another moment where I was cracked open in my practice, like something shifted. And I approached Caroline and I said, like, we worked together a couple of times that year, like had 2 hours to make something, and then poof, it was kind of on stage for Music on Main. And I said to Caroline, like, would you want to see what happens if we got together for more than 2 hours to see what we could make? And she agreed. Oh my gosh, because she's like such an incredible artist. I was shocked, but also really felt privileged that I got to spend time with her. And we started making a work together, which would later become Graveyards and Gardens, which would premiere online during the pandemic. And then we're still touring it. And we'll be touring it until 2026, which I think then we might put it away for a while. So, but that piece really changed me, and working with Caroline really changed me. She's like my own personal voice coach. Like, I don't know how I got so lucky. Nice. She taught me how to sing.
Beautiful. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I feel like incredibly fortunate to have had that experience. And she gave me more confidence with electronics. Like, one of the first residencies we had together, we didn't want to be reliant on like the technical staff at the building. We wanted to be able to do everything ourselves. That was something that was really important to us. So both of us just started teaching ourselves how to like hook up all the different audio gear we were interested in using. So like, I would get a mixer, she would get a mixer, we would start buying adapters, we'd get more cable. Like every day, her and I would just like come in with other things that like we'd run to Tom Lee or Long and McQuaid, and we just like kept on adding to it. So like also working with her and from like even a material based space gave me the confidence that like, I don't need to wait for somebody to come set this up for me. I can walk into any room, figure out what the soundboard is, figure out what I need to do, and come prepared with the various adapters. And that gave me a lot of freedom in terms of what I was able to do in different spaces, because all of a sudden I didn't need a particular space. I could kind of adapt any space to do what I needed to do in order to create. And then, yeah, I really like working with sound is so important to my practice. So it became very fluid in terms of creating generative sound systems with movement in order to construct works. And then in terms of conceptual ideas behind works, how I arrive at them, I am like an avid news reader, sadly.
I know.
I can't help it.
No.
I've never been a good sleeper. I wake up in the middle of the night and I read the news, and
That will keep you
affects
awake.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it also kind of like allows my nervous system to reflect on where I am and to appreciate where I am and to understand like and be empathetic for other places and other bodies. So like there's something about that I think is always feeding into the work.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think that's also something that's like really feeds my practice is the ethics of how things are made. And that's always at the front of what I do, how we agree to make things together, because my work is very collaborative and how I make things with people is incredibly collaborative, and sometimes it's completely co-authored. Sometimes, you know, I'm directing, but still everyone's voice in the room is a part of the creative process in a very strong and meaningful way. So I really feel like the ethics are embedded in the work as well. So just saying like I work with a brave policy space. We're every day we're in dialogue about ongoing consent and what that looks like for each person in the room and how we are going to approach what we want to do together. Yeah. So I think does that kind of answer both those questions simultaneously?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely introduces, you know, how sound became, you know, a natural part, an organic kind of evolution in some ways. But then, and bonuses, you've given us bonus information. like in terms of, I just love not just the experimental or exploratory in terms of the work itself, but the material, like you talk about touch, but there's also the tactile, the tactility, if that's even a word, I don't even know, of process itself, you know. So then I would say there's the abstract use of sound, where we might expect sounding to be part of a contemporary language, but then there's also conversation. There's also learning to sing. There's the technical aspect coming back in. There's the exploring all of these elements, regardless of whether or not they're going to become part of a work. Like I think just the fact that they are integral to you as an artist and to processes, I think is really just valuable information. And I think it gives people permission. Maybe a better way to say it is, as somebody said to me, they're clues. They've given me clues as to how I might, you know, approach something, or how I might. And I just, there's something so beautiful about that. I feel like the other thing I just want to draw on is this like co-authored and this ongoing consent, and the ways in which I think now more than ever we are more open to that being part of a process, because we understand as people that it doesn't have to necessarily get in the way of an artistic vision. And I do think for a long time there was a bit of a fear that maybe that way of practicing would change the work. No, not necessarily for the better, but I feel like one of the doors you've opened in this conversation is that ongoing consent also involves agency of each of the individual artists. And so it's not, you don't take the time in rehearsal to spend time on consent. There's an acknowledgement that is in the way that you're rehearsing. It is in the room and it is in the work. I just wanted to.
Yeah. And it starts from the beginning of the day. Like every day we sit down, we talk, we ask everyone how they're doing. And we talk about like, if anything's off limits in that day, or if they want to explore something in particular that day, like it is part of how we set up each day. And then also it can change throughout the day. Like that's the thing too. It is ongoing, right? So there's always open dialogue. Yeah. And just to say too, like kind of like there is a part of this methodology, like I have a body work practice that I've been doing since I was like really young. I had an incredible naturopath and chiropractor named Verna Hunt when I was really young, and she taught me how to do body work on myself because my nervous system was so wound tightly. And so I've brought that into different works in different ways. But what I love about sound is it does something to our bodies in a sense, like, and I work with compression too in this way, and in my systems I work with compression in terms of like co-regulating. Like, I look at ways that how we can co-regulate as we're performing. That's interesting to me. And that does something to an audience too. Yeah. So I feel like, you know, when you get like a hug from somebody or you put on a weighted blanket, there is like something that actually physically happens to your nervous system. And I am always looking for that compression and that feedback. And so like sound kind of offers that compression in a way. And also I like a lot of the systems I work with compression or expansion.
I love all this. There are the layers of kind of information or like knowledge, and then there's the application of that, and the timing of its application, I think, is also an art making practice. I think that's quite wonderful. Quite wonderful. Can we talk about you traveling the world? When did that all start? Because we worked together in 2015. I think it was 2015.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And around that time, we were both a lot younger, a whole decade younger.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Isn't that wild? But I do remember around that time, you were not in the zone of travel. You were not in the zone of touring. You were not at all, at that point, open to it.
Yeah. Like, I think, you know, I was like, it was just like the reality of making work and being like a emergent artist is like the finances of it, you know, the complications of it,
practicalities, logistics,
the practicality or logistics, you know. But I think it, you know, as I had the privilege of performing and touring Container, actually quite like shortly after that, like 2016, I'd say I started touring Container internationally and a bit nationally, and it taught me with a solo work that was quite small how to do it. And I think that was a good step for me. And, you know, some people can just jump right in with a huge group piece and be like, here. But for me, the practicality and getting the confidence and also learning how to communicate my needs in different venues and understanding, like even just the simple act of understanding what a magic sheet was, like asking for a magic sheet and being able to look at it and know exactly like, okay, this is what's available in the grid and this is how I'm going to use it and this is what I need to be hung. Yeah. Because, you know, I didn't have such a big team supporting what I was doing at that point. Though I do have to say, like James Proudfoot, I've been working with James Proudfoot as a lighting designer since my first work for the state, 2000 and
long time,
12 or 13 or something like that. So like James and I have been working together for over a decade, and James has always been incredibly generous in terms of how to share that information and help me in terms of moving into different spaces and different theaters, and taught me so much and still teaches me so much. So, you know, I think Container was like a good foot in that. And then, you know, I had quite the year right before the pandemic, I had quite a bit of touring, and I was like home for a week, gone for two, almost the entire year. It was really, really busy. So when the pandemic hit, I definitely, like, I was exhausted, and it was, in some ways, as horrible as it was and as devastating it was also nice to have some time at home. And some time to ground and refocus. And that was important. And just before the pandemic hit, actually, I was in New Zealand and Eritrea with the Space to Fail program with Adam Hayward and Critical Path from Australia through the Dance Center in residence with a bunch of fabulous artists. And that time was really important because it was space to fail. Like we actually had this time, like to not produce. What happens when a bunch of artists get together and they don't have to produce? And it was actually so productive in the sense that like it gave me space that slowed me down, that prepared me for what was about to come. So I say to Adam actually that it kind of it was exactly what I needed, and I didn't even know that I needed it at that time. And it actually carried me through the pandemic in a really important way. And then I had a baby.
In the
So
middle of all of it.
yeah. Before I had a baby, though, I got to go to Romania, and Simona and I had been preparing to create Blot together, body line of thought, before the pandemic. And bizarrely enough, its subject matter is totally connected to pandemic experiences, even though it's not centered around that. And we were very clear not to center the work around the pandemic as we were making it. It's about bacteria in our bodies and how our bacteria governs our social behavior, and also governs so many other things in the world and in the planet, and our close relationship with coexistence and collaboration with bacteria. And I had to go because Simona wouldn't have gotten her funding for the year if I didn't go. So she was like, you have to come. I was like, can we do it online? She was like, no, you have to come. So I went, and it was intense, but it was amazing. And we worked in Portugal at the time too, at Cultivemos Coutura. And I'm really proud of the piece that we made. And that piece still has a really nice touring life as well. We're going to bring it to the Dance Center next fall.
Oh, great.
Please come.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you didn't get to see it before, you'll hopefully see it this time around. And, we were supposed to premiere it with Plastic Orchid Factory in the fall of October 2020, and we couldn't do it because of the conditions of the pandemic. And so I did a video installation of that work where I toured everyone around on Zoom in these 15-minute installation that James and I built together, reflecting off of the video material and the bacteria, that imagery that Simona and I had collected. And part of that work is we actually cultivate our own bacteria and project it into the space as part of the work. And then Caroline and I made Graveyards and Gardens during the pandemic as well, and we premiered it online. And so both those pieces have gone on to have really nice touring lives as things started to open up. And I think, part of that was things that were set up before the pandemic that we said we were going to do, and then they had gotten postponed. And so I had quite a bit of work that was postponed that I was able to just kind of jump right back into as things started to slowly open up. And yes, and the baby, and having a baby.
And the baby, and balancing all of that.
Yeah, and I had my son during that, and we started touring again 5 months postpartum, which wasn't really the best decision for my body, but I learned a lot. And Anya Sagstad came and jumped in and saved me at one point during that tour because I was no longer able to dance because I broke my foot. But I learned about what my capacity was, and I'm still learning.
Yeah, and so you said, so this, like with Container, when people have asked to do the piece, you found yourself with Blot actually almost recasting it, right? People stepped in for you.
Yeah.
So what was that experience like for you?
That was amazing. Well, I joke with Simona because Simona asked me, like, when can we tour this? Are you jumping back in? And I said, no, I would do my ode to Marie Chouinard, my postpartum pelvic floor would have leakage as we skip naked on stage for like about 10 minutes in the work, and I wasn't able to do that. So she said, can we recast it with people locally? And I said, yeah, that's a great idea, because most of our touring at that point was in Europe. And so it made sense in terms of like green, like slow touring, like people not necessarily having to fly internationally. Exactly. And so I worked with them online as they remounted the work. And then the first time I got to see them do it live, finally, was when they came here for Push to do it in 2024. Yeah. And so that was the first time I saw the cast do it live. I had seen them on video. I had seen them through Zoom, but the first time I actually got to see Maria Luisa and Simona de Bage do it live was then. And Simona also, she was very clear. She's like, I don't want to just fill your part and perform it with somebody else. If like you ever perform it again, then I will perform it again. But I'm really clear that I'm only performing this work with you. Oh. And so I totally understood that. I said to her, like, whatever combination you want to do, I'm happy. Like I trust Simona implicitly. This is Simona Diaconescu, who's Tangaj Collective based in Romania. And so it was really beautiful. Yeah. Like and it's amazing. Mary Louisa and Simona de Bage are two amazing performers, and their embodiment of the work is really moving. And yeah, they're such generous performers and collaborators in that sense. But yes, it was like almost in an exact remount of the particular work. But the work is structured in a very particular way that that facilitates that, I think, quite easily in that sense.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's quite beautiful that the two people change because of the relationship that you build up over time when you're working on things like this, and giving two people the opportunity to do that. I've been in works where that's happened, where every time it's performed, it's a new cast. The score is then, but there's something about going through it together on the same kind of timeline and experiencing it at the same points, which I think is really an important aspect of the work, it seems, or is a process in itself anyway. So yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, the work is like strangely mathematic as well.
Right.
Which is like also like kind of like lends itself to that in terms of that kind of process of transmission.
Yeah, great. So group works then. Let's get to the current program with the Dance Centre, or programming of your work at the Dance Centre. Soft Currents, and then the newer work. Is it Limited Spaces? Is that your working title for it or something?
No. I'm doing like a project with them over a number of years using liminal spaces in the building, but landings for six is the piece that we're going to do for IDD. Okay. But it's based off of that, so I can talk a bit about that as
so
well,
Soft Currents was a piece that people, some of the listeners may have actually been involved in, participated in, or witnessed at the International Dance Day of 2024. And this year you're working on an installation type work, which is a development of an installation work. So could you talk and say the title again and talk about that? And that's why I'm talking to you now, is the prelim to International Dance Day 2025. So just to bring us right in. Right to the moment.
Oh, nice. Drum roll on the microphone hit. Yeah, I approached the Dance Center, I think it was like almost 2 years ago. I said, Cal, I have this score. I want to do it. And she said yes. And I was like, fantastic. And just to like give a little shout out to Dave and Tiff from Modus Operandi Out Inner Space. During the pandemic, they said, can you make a piece for Modus where nobody touches? It can be done outside, inside, and maybe has sound, maybe doesn't. And I was like,
yep.
Yeah. So I devised this score, which I was calling Spring Scores at that time, but we've landed on Soft Currents now. And so I really built it for them, and I wanted to expand it to working with a professional cast, which is how I approached the Dance Center to work in partnership for it. The work is based off of communal responsibility, listening, and a co-authored kind of mix of poetics and directives. And so on the first day of the process, I give the artists who we're working with a piece of text that I've wrote that's very specific. It's a mix between like directives, anatomical experiences, and poetic experiences, and they interpret it and build a phrase of movement based off of it. Then they write a piece of text that's in response to that. They create a movement score that's directly related to their own personal text, and we create an open source document that has everybody's text in it, which becomes a layer to the score later. And I also record everybody speaking their text, which I also then goes into a larger sound score that the performers hear, but the audience never hears. And the score that the performers hear is my text, and then all of their text broken up, like word by word, sentence by sentence, layered together over the course of like, depending on how many artists are doing the score, anywhere between 20 minutes and 35 minutes. And they have very specific instructions in terms of like responding to my text, their own personal text, and then every day they go through the score and pick 12 new pieces of text from everybody else from the open source document. And we have certain like things, something has to locomote, something has to be gestural, and they create a specific vernacular that goes with that text. And every day they're drawing from new text, so we're always keeping it fresh. And then there's other layers to the score as well. So I say it's a co-authored score because it really is a co-authored score. We're pulling pulling from each other's texts. And I kind of give the preface to everybody beforehand, like, please don't write anything down that you don't want anyone else to read or hear, because this is something that we're all going to share together. So, so this isn't just for you, this is for everybody. And so we go through that process, and then the score continues on and expands past the audio that they're listening to, and works with Brady Mark's incredible sound score, where she drew sounds from the building and other kind of sound walks that then get linked together to create kind of a very atmospheric experience. Like just these amazing kind of eruptions of unison, isolation, connection. It's like it has this kind of really interesting rhythm. And I've done it a number of times with different groups. I think I've done it with almost like 100 pre-professional students. And what I found each time we did it is it didn't matter that almost, 95% of the text changed. The journey of the work, or the emotional journey of the work, was still the same. And I thought that's so interesting that you can change 95% of the content that the performers are responding to, and it still holds the resonance or the emotional specificity of what the initial score contained the first time we did it. So that's why I was really interested. So I approached the Dance Center. They were really excited about the project, and we did it for IDD, and we did an open call. We had an incredible amount of applications. I wish we could have taken everybody. We had 65 applications. We were supposed to do it with 10 people. We ended up doing it with 15. So thank you again to the Dance Center for finding more money to bring more people on. And then we had the privilege of doing it again for DIV, where we got to move the work through the building as an installation work, and then into the theater for the culmination of it. And that was the vision of the work, because the vision of the work was that it could be done outside, it could be done site specific, it could be done in a theater. So I was really curious and this was the first time I really got to do that, is how it functioned in these different ways in different spaces. And I'm really interested in these liminal spaces that we often move through in a building that houses dance, but we don't necessarily spend time in these transitional spaces like the stairwell. I mean, we all know that we all hang out in the hallways. Yes, we get that. But what are the other places that we don't actually often spend time and space in? And so for me, that was really exciting. Alexis was in the elevator for DIV. We had people in the stairwell. We had people in the corridor while the audience was in the studio watching. We tried to find other ways, what is it to dance in the lobby outside of the Ferris, where people just normally line up and then shuffle in, I really wanted to ask people to spend time in those spaces, and it was really fulfilling. And so the next project that I'm doing is based off of a project that I started last year with the Dance Center and a festival in New York called Estrogenius, in partnership with La Mama, a theater space there. And 2 artists performed the work simultaneously in both spaces. So they did the performance 4 times at the same time on 2 different time zones. And they worked with the same score, but interpreting it in very specific ways that were genuine to their embodiment and their interests. So Justin Calvadors performed it here in Vancouver, and Dorchelle Hack performed it in New York. So that will be an exhibit of the 2 video archives. It's going to be in the lobby for the month of April, and you're going to hear them performing their work in their stairwells. We performed it all in the back main stairwell of the Dance Center. So we'll have the sound of them performing in the stairwell. So you'll hear Justin and Dorchelle performing, not in the lobby where you'll see the video documentation of it, but in the stairwell. And then on April 29th, 6 artists will be performing Landings for 6. So the original work was called Between the Landings, and the new interpretation of the work is called Landings for 6. There'll be 6 artists performing a new score based off of the archive of that score that they performed in the stairwell at the Dance Center, and then also I believe it'll be at the VAG as well for one at the stairwell of the VAG, and then we'll come back to the Dance Center.
All on International Dance Day, all on the 29th of April. Yeah.
Exactly. And for the whole month of April, you can see the documentation of Dorchelle and Justin doing the original work Between the Landings, and you can hear their performance if you visit the stairwell.
Wonderful.
which I think is going to be quite lovely. Though I don't know what that experience is going to be like yet, because we can't really test it until we install it.
Exactly. So you can't actually know, which is also another liminal space, right? Between and that space of art, as Rick Rubin talks about, there's the imagination and then there's the reality. And they're actually two very different things, but they are both the art. So there's something really beautiful about that. So this is what's going on for you right now, and your relationship with the Dance Center, but you have other projects on the go, and it's a little bit of my kind of closer of like what's now, what's next. Could you talk a little bit about what's coming up for you?
Yeah, I'd say like the biggest thing that's coming up for me is we're going to be premiering Whale, which is WAIL, in 2026, actually at the Dance Center in partnership with Music on Main and Push. As the next group work in a series of works, I'm creating a trilogy over the course of a very long period of time. Chorus was the first one, and this work is the second part of the trilogy. The whole trilogy is called When We Sing Together. And it's really about communal experiences and bringing people together. And I'm really delighted. We're working with an incredible group of people, and we've been working on this work since 2023.
Great.
And so I'm thrilled to be kind of pushing into the last phases into production of this work.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And so that's kind of the big project that we're doing. And then we're also doing a bit of touring. We're tuning to Germany in May, going to Boston in 2 weeks with Graveyards and Gardens. Blood is on tour through Europe. And so those are kind of like the main projects, but the biggest push right now in terms of our creative capacity is focusing on Whale this next year, and supporting the pre-existing works that are out on the road and having lives continually kind of. Oh, and sorry, one other project.
I was just going to bring it up. Yeah. Go on.
Future alternates too. Is this what you were going to bring up with Simona?
No.
Simona. Okay.
She has more. She's not telling us. But we'll wait for the rest. Okay, go on.
Simona and I are starting our second work together called Future Alternates, with incredible support from the Dance Center and also from the Crystal Dance Prize, from Dance Victoria. And so we'll start that this fall as well. And I think we'll premiere that in 2027. So we have a bit of a nice runway for that as well.
The things that you're talking about right now are action at a distance.
Yes.
And works under that umbrella. And we didn't quite get there in this conversation, but I am interested in the repertoire connection that is also in your past and in your 5 years of SFU, and wanting to kind of learn about that and your time with Dancers Dancing, and how that has naturally, again, come into play in terms of since Container, it seems, because you have created quite a few group works in the past and those things, but your choice to move in that direction has helped you also form the kind of repertoire, not only that you want to put out into the world, but that starts to, in some way, inform where it gets performed, where your work is seen, who sees it. And I just think they're beautiful components of what makes an oeuvre of an artist, because they all fit together, where the work is seen, who presents it, how long it takes for things to, how long works last in the world, and how long you choose for them to last, and where they premiere, all of those components do factor in. And I think there's been a natural kind of evolution of that journey in that way. But is there anything that you have not yet achieved that you are hoping you would, that you see as in Action at a Distance's kind of future?
I don't know, I feel like things are so kind of precarious right now in terms of how things are developing socially, politically, economically, that I'm just so grateful anytime I get to do something.
Yeah.
Like seriously, like it's a miracle anytime something happens. People come together to make something. It gets to be seen by an audience. I feel like I'm so in the moment of just trying to make sure the things that I've promised to people materialize. And I mean that like in a very almost simple way too. It's like when I make a commitment to artists that I'm going to hire them, I feel a great responsibility to follow through on that and to do it at all costs for myself, you know? And so for me, it's really like, it's almost hard for me to go like, what's the wildest dreams that I hope to come to, because really like I just hope I get to do what I've envisioned for the next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that in itself, and for many people listening, will be will be the wildest dream. You're living it. Yeah. But the other side is one thing we get from this, and I think is really important, and for me is always so important, is that there's that fine line between feeling ready and being prepared and actually taking the leap and doing it. But then there is that element of being ready, like knowing that you are ready for opportunities as they come up. That is how we can manage and how we can have a trust in ourselves to be able to deliver and to be ready to create the art, because you do need to be ready. You do need to be prepared. It takes preparation. So I think that's a really beautiful thing. I think you've set up so many wonderful systems and given so many opportunities to people, and have so many opportunities. You know, I think you're very aware of that, you know, that they go hand in hand, right? But you have a wonderful connection, like a network. There's a beautiful network of support, right, that you feel, and you need that in order to be able to create work, I think. Can't do it in a vacuum.
Yeah, exactly. I think everything is based on relationality and relationships with people. And I really trust the people I get to work with. I'm really inspired by them. And I mean that on all levels. I mean that creatively in the studio. I mean that outside of the studio. Hilary Maxwell works with me as artistic producer at the company. I mean that with presenting organizations that I have the privilege of collaborating with. It is collaborative. We all have to meet each other today. Like, you can't just expect to show up and everything to be laid out. You have to, like, for me at least, the way my career's worked has been through relationships and relationship building, and it's taken time and care, and I'm grateful for that, because it isn't transactional, and I'm not interested in transactional relationships in this practice. I don't have capacity for that, I think, actually.
I think that's really a wonderful place to just kind of settle into as we leave this interview here, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you again soon. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you so much. That was really lovely. Wonderful. Okay, I will see you very soon, but the listeners will also get to see your work International Dance Day, if not before. So again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you to the Dance Center. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for listening. We would love for you to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, as this will help other listeners find us and help us to grow our dance audience. We'll be back next month. In the meantime, you can follow us on Facebook at The Dance Center, Twitter at Dance Center, and Instagram at The Dance Center BC. And if you'd like to support our work, please consider making a donation. Just go to our website at thedancecenter.ca, where you'll find extensive information about our upcoming programs and events. The music for the Dance Center podcast was composed by James B. Maxwell. Always a pleasure to connect with you through dance. Until next time.